So what we want to do now is we want to do some serial processing. I know a lot of you in the past have asked for how can I add, for example, a bunch of holes to my profiles in a specific order, and this was also possible in the old version. But as long as you change the profile length, for example, change the height of the door or the facade or anything, the whole structure went following. It wasn't adjusted because it was a static formula. Now with this new MCO mode, we are able to make dynamic serial processing. This means it will be a lot easier for you to work with the same serial processing groups for a lot of different elements. So what I want to do now, I want to put some 10mm holes in the back of the mullion profile, and therefore I rotate my profile like this, and I go to my processing window. I right click on my mullion. I say not new process like I did before. I go instead to new serial process and choose hole. Now you see you have two different alternatives. Either you can use the type 1 with the first and the last processing and a max distance, or you can work with the type 2 where you have the first processing, a specific distance and number of processes. In my case, because I want to have my first hole on 500mm, my last hole on 500mm, and the max distance of the holes must not exceed 500mm. That's my criteria. So I say here, my first processing should be 500mm, the max distance should be 500, and the last processing should be the profile length minus 500. And say OK. And now you see, doesn't look that well actually. Click here and you see the holes are like not on the wrong side, they're not right position, so I have to check the parameters. And this you do on the properties in the left on the processing window. So we see here the reference point, the page is on the page 1, and like I told before, I want to have it on the back of the profile. This means I want to have it on page 3. So I have to change from 1 to 3 like this. The corner section view left is okay. And then the X parameter, okay, I don't know what X is, then I can always go and have a check. Okay, X means it's the width of the profile. I can go back and say, I know that the width is 50mm and I want in the middle, that means 25. Say okay. And the depth offset is 0mm, which is okay. And I think this is actually the way I want it. If we have a look now on the back of the profile, you see we have the first hole here, 500mm, and it's should be diameter 10, like you can see here. And then we have the other holes here. This one as well. So this is very easily done. And now if I would change the profile height from 3000 to maybe 4 or 5000, we will still have the first and the last hole of 500mm, and the rest of the holes wouldn't exceed 500mm. If you don't believe me, I can check this. So I go to item view and I change the height to 4000, say OK, and I go back to the processing mode. I rotate so I can see the back of the profile like this. I have my serial process. Here you see, this is 500. same diameter, and you still have the holes here. And you see all the parameters have been automatically adjusted. So what I've done now, I've only done this serial processing for mullion number 1. And like before, I want to have it on all the other mullions and also be able to use this for the future projects. Therefore, I need to save this as a processing group like we did before. So I go to the serial process in the processing window, right click and say save processing group. You see this is the same folder structure we have before where we saved our processing groups. So even this is a serial process, it's also saved under the same folder. And I click, I want to save it under FWS50. I want to call it serial processing 10 millimeter. And also here you should name it as detailed as possible. But I, for now, just name it like this. Say OK. And now we have saved it. That means I could, for this specific mullion, right click on the serial process and say delete. And to add this, like I did before, go back, change mode. And go back again to the position. And I change the height back to 3000. Say OK. And now, like before, I want to add this to all the mullions, and we learned in the other example that we should use the selection tree. Go for profiles, select the mullions, right click, add processing group, start a bar, go to FWS50, and you see now I also have my serial processing. The longer the profile gets, the smaller the picture gets, of course. Choose this one, say OK. And now I've added everything to the profiles. This I can also see when I go to the processing mode. So I have a look at my mullion, go to the processing mode, have a look at the mullion number 1 you see here. You have the same for the mullion 2. Serial processing has taken effect everywhere. And if I click here, you will see they're all added exactly the way I wanted. Easily done. So this is how you do the serial processing. Could be a lot of different operations, not only holes. Like I showed you before, you have a lot of different possibilities here to the left to choose from, and this is a really powerful tool. And in my next exercise I would like to talk to you a little about the filters. For instance, if we have this serial processing now, we have a bunch of holes and they're all 10 millimeter in diameter, and maybe I want to change all the holes from 10 to 5 millimeters. For instance, I would use the filter, because if you use the filter function, it's because everything you see on the screen in Chocal will actually be executed and sent to the machine. And for some reason, maybe you say, okay, in the K drawing, this working operation should be like this, with this radius, with this width and height and so on. And maybe because of different tolerances, maybe you want to force the CNC machine to use a specific tool. Then it's perfect to use the filter to force the machine to maybe work with a bigger radius, take a bigger tool, make it faster, for example. Or you maybe want to change or move working operations every time. And instead of doing this every single time on the machine directly in the CAM software, you should do it in Chocal MCO mode and get it automized. And the way of doing this is working with filters. So I strongly recommend you, if you haven't done this before, that you should set filters and adjust the processing just the way you want it. And also here, You have the responsibility. You can always check with us if you're not sure about anything. If you do any change, just always check out that it works in Truecaller before you send it to machine, that everything looks okay. What we do now, we want to, like I said, change all these holes in the back of the profile to 5mm, except for the lower one, the one on 500mm from the start of the profile. This we want to have 8mm. Therefore, I want to make a filter. And if you see up here in the filter menu, you see settings and activate. I click on settings. And then you see here, looks pretty much the same as before. I click on new here. And then we come to the filter. And this looks a little bit new, because first, in the past you could also search for a filter, but here it's you see it's much cleaner, much easier to work. First we have to give a filter name, and I say change from 10 to 5mm hole or something. Also this should be named in a good way so you'd find it. And then I can say this will change every hole from 10 to 5mm. First hole will be 8, for example. This is just for information. And the rule, my first rule is I want to change every hole from 10 to 5mm. So I say from 10 to 5mm. Don't say OK, because then you will leave the box. So you say enter, or you click somewhere here below. So then we have a little bit more information. First we have the search key. That means what is Truecaller going to search for? To be able to execute something, to change something, delete something, copy something, we need to find what we are looking for. That means we have to tell the filter what should we search for. And in this case we're searching for a hole which is 10mm. You should keep this filter as general as possible, but of course you need to define it so you don't want things to happen where you don't want it to happen, of course. And if we make like a general rule to say to Truecaller, make every hole which is 10mm to 5, it could get very dangerous. So I would make this very specific. But this is an example, and I will show you the possibilities. For example, design type. You can say this filter should only affect window facades, conservatories, for example. If I say facades, this will only be for facades. You can also say this should only affect a specific article number, for example. If you say this should only affect my mullion, then I say asterisk and then the article number, like this. And then it will only happen if it finds this article number. In this case, I take it away. And also we have the purpose. Here you can search for different profile types, also to limit the search order. And most important of all is the processing. Here you can define everything you want, the type, for example. It could be a fitting, a hinge, or a lock, or whatever, where it should search for. Or we have also the base unit, where you can search for different processing. We have the depth, the length, the width, and so on. In this case, we're looking for a hole with a diameter of 10mm. And I say OK. So what do we want to happen? Now we have, if Truecaller finds this processing in my item, then we need something to happen. Therefore we have the modification mode. And also here I click to the right and say, okay, we search for the base unit hole, and we want to change the diameter to 5mm. And say OK. So like I said before, this is a really general filter, just to show how it's done. And I also told you we only want to change we want to change the first hole from 10 to 8 millimeters, because now every hole is changed. Therefore I need to make a second rule, or a second filter. The best way is to make a second rule within the same filter. So I can make as many rules as I want within the filter. I go to the second rule and I say change from 5 to 8 millimeter, and then I say OK, and then I go for the search key, the processing here. I say search for a hole which now is 5 millimeter, because we have already the first rule has taken effect. Search for 5 millimeters, and it should only search for the first hole, which is placed on 500 millimeters. Therefore I have to set the set position to search only within the range of 500 millimeter in the set position. Could also be from 100 millimeter to 500, or from 0 to 500, but this is the search area, and it should be exactly on 500 millimeters. I say OK. And what I want to do, yes, I want to change this to 8 millimeters. So I go to hole, diameter, 8 millimeter. OK. And now I have to check that I have the rules in the right order, because as you can see here, I have first my rule, changing everything from 10 to 5 millimeters. And then the second rule is search for 5 millimeter holes and change to 8. So this would be the right order for it. I could, of course, with the arrows here, change the order, but then it wouldn't work. So I place this on top again. Say OK. And then it's activated for this item. I say save, OK. And now you want to try this out before you send it to machine. So I can actually have a preview of this. Up here it says activate, and this doesn't mean it activates the machine, that this, what you see here, will be sent automatically to the machine. Therefore you have to make a machine file. What you do is, if you click here, activate, it starts the search key, and if it finds this, then it will modify it. So now you see here, the first hole should be, if we're lucky, 8 millimeters. Yeah, that's right. It's also positioned on 500 millimeters. And the next hole should be like 5 millimeters. Yeah. So this is the case, how you can do it and work with it. But like I said before, make the filter only work where you want to make these changes. I really hope you liked this video. For me, of course, it's very easy to speak about my favorite topic, but also to get this information over to you is important. Also feel free to subscribe and give us some heads up if you want to know about a specific topic. We'll gladly help you out and produce a new video for you. So, thank you guys. See you next time. Bye.